Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Lasaniziris, and this is my YouTube channel grecochess. In this video, we continue the coverage of the grecochess online tournament that's taking place in the platform of chess.com. One more game has been concluded, and we are going to cover it. But before we start this game, a very exciting announcement. One of our subscribers, Zanilo from Italy, is creating a new online tournament, the Underline Moonlight, the Nine Moons Tournament. It will take place when we have 243 players registered. Until now, we have 43 of them, including myself. And I would like to invite the viewers, especially the ones with chess.com account, to register. And once it starts, we're going to have a regular coverage of the tournament. But for now, we're going to continue covering the game that was completed and see what happened. And here we are. It's from group 2, the same two players we saw recently, but now it is the colors the other way around. With the white pieces is MGC 89, who has from the Brazil rating of 1189, and with the black pieces, Boris Alexandrovich Peasants from the United States with a rating of 830. And with these ratings, of course, white MGC 89 is a favorite. But let's see what actually happened in the game. White starts by sending the pawn to e3, and the computer says not a recommended move. There are more active ways to control the center. And of course, they mean pushing pawns to the fourth instead of the third rank, but it's still a book move. You see this little book here. And black replies with an even better move, pawn to e5, and they place a pawn at the center of the board, still in the book, but now white will deviate from the book, pawn to a3. Fair moves is a computer, good. You see the check mark means good, thumbs up means excellent, and star means it's the best move. Or some other symbols, exclamation mark means great, two exclamation marks means brilliant. And on the negative side, question mark with exclamation means inaccuracy, question mark means mistake, and two question marks is a blunder. White has just a good move and their advantage goes down to 0. Now, white lost the advantage ahead by starting first. Computer would rather have the pawn go to d4. How will black reply? Pawn to d5. Yes, the best way. You see the star. Black has started with two great moves, sending the pawns at the center of the board. White is conceding space for now. Not enough to lose the game, but not a good start. Knight to c3. Okay, move. Good. Develop the knight. Knight to d6 for black. You see the thumbs up. Excellent move. Pawn to b4 for white. Inaccuracy. Too early to start this. Yes, it's a good idea to exert pressure on the square c5 and gain some space, but white is not ready yet. They have not developed all their pieces to do so. Black sends a knight to c6, develops one more piece. Bishop to b5 and pins the black knight. This is what's called an absolute pin because the knight cannot move from c6. Otherwise, the king is exposed and it's illegal move. When black converts the absolute pin into a relative one by placing the queen on d7. Now black can legally move the knight from c6, but if they do so, they lose the queen. Pawn to f3 for white, continues development. And now this is a blunder for black. You see the two question marks. Why it's a blunder? You're going to see later. The knight from f3 can go to e5 and not just wins a pawn. It is bad enough for black to win a central pawn, but attacks the queen. And if the black knight on c6 takes the knight on e5, then they lose a queen. Well, black will end up winning two pieces for a queen and a pawn, insufficient. But will white see it? Don't take it for granted that people are going to see, players are going to see all the opportunities given to them. But this time they saw it, and you see the great move with exclamation mark. Black has to save the queen. There are three squares to go: e8, d7, e8, e7, and d6. If they go to e7, they lose another pawn because knight takes knight, and when pawn takes back, bishop can take the pawn. And black decides one pawn is enough, not concede the second pawn. Queen goes to d6. Of course, the white knight will take the black, otherwise the white knight was going to be lost, was in danger. Black takes back, of course, with the pawn and not the queen. If you take with the queen, they lose the queen. And white needs to save the bishop, and they think the best way to do it is the check, because black will need to spend the move to defend the king. The computer thinks it's excellent, but not the best. Computer would rather have the bishop go to d3. Not an easy move to see, because it blocks, among others, the pawn on d2 that you don't want to. Somehow the computer would rather have this move. King, instead of going, the king basically has two legal moves, either b8 or d7. Clearly d7 is the best, as the computer says, because on d7 you have a coverage of the pawn of c7, c65. Yes, you're in the d file in the center of the board, but at least you have three pawns near you, then a queen, then a rook, the bishop, and you're up to point safe. On b8, what do you have? In the B file, nothing. You have the A7 pawn diagonally, which is isolated and easy to be lost, and pawns on C7 and C6. That is why best move was the second best. Computer gives it excellent just because there was no other choice. Knight to A4 to enter the game, meaning be near the black king. Computer would rather have the bishop go to b2 because it attacks pawn on g7 and freezes the black bishop on f8. Otherwise, g7 pawn is lost, and then the rook on h8. Knight to e7 for black, and we completed 10 moves, and white has an advantage of 2.9. But will they be able to use it to win? There is no immediate knockout move for white, but if they can keep the advantage, well, they can end up in a winning ending. Pawn to c3, not very good for the computer. Yes, it controls the d4 square and opens the diagonal for queen to go to from d1 to a4. On the other side, it blocks the bishop. If bishop goes to b2 for white, it is frozen there. King to a8 for black, hoping to give a little bit more safety for the king and send the rook to b8. Computer would rather have the bishop go to c8. Why? Because white is in the attack, and if black can exchange pieces and especially remove the bishop on a6, they'll be in less immediate danger. Pawn to b5 for white. A little bit too early to start this attack. The advantage falls to 0.5. Black will take the pawn. Not a good move. The computer would rather have the rook go to b8. But white now will blunder queen to b3. Why is this a blunder? Two of white pieces are under attack, and they remain under attack. The knight on a4 from the pawn on b5, and the bishop on a6 by the queen on d6. But look what's happening. If the pawn on b5 takes the knight on a4, queen goes to b7 in checkmate for white. That's what's called a swindle, trying to seduce your opponent to take something nice, and then boom, next move, and you kill them. But what will black do? Will they fall for the swindle? Nope, they take the bishop on a6, and now from being down 1.3 for up, for white being up 1.3. Now you see black is up by 4.0, quite an enormous advantage. But will they be able to end the game like that? Continue. What will white do? Knight goes to c5 and attacks both the queen on a6 and the bishop on e6. Of course, the queen will save itself, go to c6, and white will use a chance to take the black bishop. May wonder why do it, since black is ahead by a piece. Well, maybe the computer thought that the bishop of e6 was too dangerous. Black will take it to the queen, even though the computer would rather have it with a pawn. White takes the pawn on b5, and black's advantage is 4.4. Let's see what black is going to do. Knight goes to c8. By doing so, it blocks the rook from going to b8. That's what the computer would prefer for black, because then the queen has to move and the b file is black's. But black maybe wanted the bishop on f8 to be in the game. Before it was blocked by the knight, now it's free to go all the way to a3. White avoids this by sending the pawn on a4. Queen goes to b6. Black wants to exchange queens because black is ahead by a piece. When you're ahead, you want exchanges because it, first of all, you minimize the chance of making a mistake and losing a piece. Whatever is exchanged cannot be lost later. And second, you're nearer a winning ending. But will white oblige and exchange the queens? Nope. Goes to d3. Computer would rather have it go to e2 because in d3 you block the pawn on d2, but white avoided the queen exchanges and might have a chance to win the queen later. Bishop to d6 for black. Wants to start developing the bishop. White sends a pawn to a5 and attacks the black queen. Black sends a queen to b7. Save the queen. White finally castles. That's a computer wanted in earlier moves, but now it doesn't. It wants a pawn to go to a6, even though the castling, short and castling for white is excellent. And clearly now the white king is safe. At least there is no immediate danger. Black, rook to g8. Good moves in the computer. You see the check mark. Why? What is the thought behind that? What I think is the thought is because black has two rooks, g8 and h8, facing the white king. For the time being, there are the pawns white on g2, h2, black on c7, h7. But if these pawns are exchanged or disappear, or even if black makes a sacrifice to make them disappear, black has a very strong attack. Let's continue the game. What would white do? White sends a bishop on a3 and invites black to exchange bishops. Black, being a piece ahead, of course, is happy to exchange. Black takes the black bishop. The black bishop takes the white's bishop. And will white take back with the rook from a1 to a3? That seems to be noble move, but instead white does what's called a Swihenchuk, an intermediate move. Pawn goes to a6 and attacks the queen on b7. Clearly, black needs to think first how to save the queen and then what to do with the bishop. Queen goes to b3 and both the queen is safe, and for now the bishop seems to be safe. But this is an illusion. And before we continue the game, I can tell you what white can do. If the rook from a1 takes the bishop on a3, black should not take back with the queen, because then white queen goes to d5 check. Pawn goes to c6, queen takes to c6 check, king to b8, and queen to b7 is mate. But let's see what white is going to do. They are already down by 2 pieces, and it's very tempting. If they take the bishop, they're down by 1. And if black is careless, they can even checkmate. But let's see what white is going to do. White thinks that taking the bishop and being only 1 piece down is not enough, and perhaps not expecting or not even seeing the the mating opportunity. Instead, white sends the rook to b1 and threatens the black queen on b3. And if the queen disappears, then the b file belongs to the white rook on b1. How will black react? Black is ahead by 2 pieces, but they better be careful because the white queen on d3, in fact, it proves that it's better perhaps that white send the queen on d3 instead of e2 as the computer wanted. On d3, if he can take the pawn on d5, it will be very dangerous for black, and currently only the white queen stops it. And the black queen goes to a4. Computer would rather have it, of course, go to c5 and inviting white to exchange queens, or if not, at least the white queen would have to go far from the d5 pawn. And now suddenly you see that from being ahead by 3.6 black, they're behind. White is ahead by 1.3. And let's see how will the game continue, because still 1.3 is not that great of an advantage. But how will white continue? Queen goes to d5 check. White is ahead by 1.3, but as you see here, the white flag in the red circle means resignation. Black resigned, and by resigning, they lost the game. Personally, I think a little prematurely. The computer thinks that this is the best move. Personally, I would rather have the rook on a1, take the queen take the bishop on a3 because black queen cannot take it back. Let's see what would happen if the game continued. Was black's decision correct to resign? Personally, I don't think so. Yes, white is a better position. Black is ahead in material. You see the +4 by equivalent of 4 pawns, meaning a piece and a pawn. But computer has a command called show follow up. How would the game continue? Pawn controls, the knight controls the mate. And what would happen after a few exchanges is that white, of course, would keep the 1.3 advantage because computer played the best moves for both sides. White has 2 rooks and 7 pawns. Black has rook, knight, and bishop and 5 pawns. Clearly, white is in a better shape. They have no passed pawns, but the 2 extra pawns could become passed. But the advantage is not that big. Also, you see that white still has a back rank problem. Of course, black is another problem. If the rook on uh, d8 would leave the 8th rank and there was a white rook on the 8th rank, then it could be a mate if the king stayed on a8. But this concludes the game with a win for MGC89, the white player. I would say a little unexpected and a little premature resignation for black. But let's see now what the computer has to say in its review. Let's go to the review and share the screen. Here we are. Computer thinks that white MGC89 played with an accuracy of 72.5, while black Boris Alexandrovich presents with an accuracy of 67.7. And they played as if the ratings were 1100 for white, a little bit less than the 1189, and 850 for black, a little bit better than the 830. It was a back and forth game. You can see here, you see until a few moves it was even, then white had the advantage, then black had the advantage here, and finally white was ahead, although not by too much. How would it do in the various categories? No brilliant moves. White had one great when the knight took an e5. Best 6 for white, 5 for black. Excellent 6 for white, 4 for black. Good 5 for white, 9 for black. One book moves each. Early on, they left a book from the second move. Inaccuracies 3 for white, 2 for black. One mistake each. No misses, and each of them had one blunder. White, first black had the blunder when they allowed the knight to go to e5 and threaten the white queen. Then white had a blunder when they allowed black to take the white bishop on a6. And this concludes the coverage of this game. And before we end this video, first of all, once again, the announcement I mentioned before, the Underwater Moonlight, the Nine Moons Tournament, hosted by Zanilo from Italy, one of my subscribers. You're invited to participate. And what happens with this tournament now? Let's see the current grecochess tournament. How is the situation in the 4 groups? As you see here, before we go to the exact points. From the 48 games of round 1, 31 have been completed and 17 remain. Let's see what happens in all the 4 groups. Group 1, nothing has changed. All 4 players have some hope. Maxim Govorukha, with 2 wins in 2 games, of course, is ahead, has the best hopes. Butterfly, 1 win, 1 loss. There's quite some hopes. U86 30 302, 1 win, 3 losses, must win the other 2 games to be in contention. And Hunting Achievements has not completed any of their games, and we'll have to see what Hunting Achievements is going to do. Group 2 just concluded, and we have 2 players out of contention. Andrea Mart, after 2 wins, closed her account, and Boris Alexandrovich Pesens has started with 5 losses. So even if Boris wins the last game, they cannot make it. It's going to be between MGC 89, 4 wins in 4 games, and Barak 7, 3 wins, 3 games. Very crucial are going to be the 2 games between them. And if Barak 7 cannot win Boris in the last game, then in case of 1 point each, then MGC 89 will have the advantage over Barak 7. Group 3 is where I participate, and UV 1415 had 6 timeouts, so it's between the last 3 of us. Abu Talebe from Iran, the Hari, myself from Greece, and Deline from Hungary. None of the games between us has been completed. And Group 4, my skin from Italy has already advanced to the next round. This concludes the coverage of the game that just concluded. We'll continue with more games from the grecochess tournament as they conclude. Of course, we cannot have coverage of games in progress because this would be equivalent to outside assistance. Thanks to all of you that are viewing it. Special thanks to the subscribers. If you are not yet subscribed, all you need to do is click on the subscribe button, and in just one moment you'll be my next subscribers. Thanks to the likes and to the people that have written some nice encouraging comments. I'm Harilas Aniziris. This is my YouTube channel, Greco Chess. Goodbye.